remarks, but I hope after that you will have lots of very important questions, which I can't possibly answer, but I'll do my best about anything that you want to ask about. It's a beautiful sunny day here in London, and I wish you were all here. It would be much better. Now, I suggested, because Irina asked me, sorry, Professor Dr. Biskupb asked me to suggest a topic, that the mess that we're in, which is partly to do with COVID-19, but also partly to do with the American election, that might be an interesting place to kick off. Now, we suffer, like everybody else in this country, from this dreadful virus. And you probably know that two scientists have now discovered what they hope is a vaccine that will work, which will be a wonderful thing. However, there's one very interesting thing about the two scientists, and also a footnote, which goes back to the dreadful President Trump, that the two scientists are immigrants. They were Turkish, born in Turkey, and they escaped from the repressive regime in Turkey and went to Germany, where they set up a laboratory and with others have developed this vaccine. So it's extraordinary to me that with all the hostile and anti-immigrant talk, here are two people who were immigrants who look as if they're going to save civilization. And I think that's terribly important. And I also was appalled when I read a tweet, it should be a twit actually when you're talking about President Trump, but a tweet from Trump where he claimed that this was a joint venture between him, the American government, but him in particular, and Pfizer, which is the American huge pharmaceutical company, and that he alone had saved civilization. Well, firstly, it's a total lie, but we're used to that from Trump. But secondly, Pfizer then immediately, to their credit, put out saying, no, they did nothing. They just gave money to these two Turkish immigrants in Germany to help develop the vaccine. Now, just think about all the consequences. They've got the President of the United States lying, well, we're used to that. And you've got a pharmaceutical company who very honorably said, no, it wasn't us, it was them, the immigrants. Now, I don't need to remind you about how hostile most countries, Germany being one of the great exceptions, are to the whole idea of immigrants. I can't speak on behalf of the British government, but we in England, we in Great Britain, have always wanted immigrants. I mean, if we had no immigrants, our National Health Service would stop, our transport system would stop, and a great number of other things would stop. And yet you have this crazy conservative-led, almost fascist idea that unless we stop immigrants, then we won't survive as a civilization. Civilizations develop because people move all the time and interchange. I mean, I think it's appalling that all of you could not, assuming there was no COVID-19, could not get on an airplane and come to London. You'd be welcome because you need a visa. I don't understand that for 1 minute. I do not need a visa to come to you. Why do you need a visa to come to me? That's a terrible condemnation of the present system. Just reverting momentarily to COVID-19, we have suffered in this country. It's up anybody who gets this disease and dies of this disease. Obviously, that's terrible. I'm not trying to diminish that in any way whatsoever. But we have been utterly and totally misled by bogus scientists. Every politician who gets up and says, we have to follow the science. Now, the main professor, I'm ashamed to say he was a professor or is a professor in England who recommended lockdown, close everything, close the schools, close the world, no cinemas, no theatre, no concerts, nothing, was a man called Neil Ferguson. Now, in 2005, he predicted, and I have the paper here, he predicted that 200 million people would die of bird flu. Now, over the following 6 years, a total of 282 people died. This man is absurd. He's a fraud. Even more important for me, in a strange way, is I live in the west part of England, and I'm surrounded by farms. And he also said, when there was something called the mad cow disease, he also said that unless we destroyed every single cow, then mad cow disease would spread. And again, some terrible number of people, 50,000 people would die by 3 weeks' time. Eventually, 177 people died. This man is a complete fraud. And yet he was the person, science, who told the government, unless you lock down in this present COVID-19, then the end of the world will come, and it'll come jolly quickly. Just now, before I stop, I think it's really important to understand the lies that are being told in the American election. It's got nothing to do with Trump claiming that some of the elections were fraudulent. That's possible. But I mean, when you get to the absurd point where Trump, in one state, Trump is saying, because he was ahead, you've got to stop the count now. In other words, he's ahead, so he's going to win. And in another a state where he's behind, he's saying, more counting, please, to help me catch up. This man is a grotesque monster. He has brought into total disrepute the United States. I've worked a lot in the United States. I love the United States. It's full of crazy people, but so are all societies. But the really important thing is that this monster is being got rid of. There is nothing good to be said about Trump whatsoever. And I was delighted to see today on the stock exchanges of the world that as a result of the discovery of this vaccine, the stock exchanges are doing this again. So Trump won't be able to use as an excuse, well, I saved the stock exchange, I made people rich. He made a lot of rich people very rich and a lot of poor people very poor. Two final thoughts before I shut up and I want to hear from you. When I left university, which now seems like 100 years ago, was 100 years ago, actually, in my case. I don't know whether you can see all the white hairs. They're not quite falling out yet, but they're working on it. There's no hairdressers. I can't go to the hairdresser to get my hair cut, especially for you. It's terrible. 100 years ago, I joined the BBC. The BBC has two mottos, which were laid down by its original founder in 1926, a man called John Reith, eventually became Lord Reith. He said the purpose of all broadcasting is threefold: to inform, to educate, and to entertain. In some combination of that, to inform, to educate, and to entertain. And he devised a motto which sits on the front of Broadcasting House in London, which says, very simply, nation shall speak truth unto nation. And insofar as the BBC stands for anything, that is what it stands for. And I don't need to tell you how rarely that is the case, that nations speak truth to nations. My last remark is, my new friend, last year I gave a lecture about, among other things, Svetlana Alexievich, who, as you know, was at the time the only Ukrainian-born ever to win any Nobel Prize. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Her works are an absolute necessity. If you haven't got them and you haven't read them, please do so. Here's one. I don't know whether you can read it. And what is interesting about this particular book, which is called Secondhand Time, is it describes in detail from eyewitnesses of what the end of communism was like, who was suffering and from what. And she has spoken truth unto nations. And that is really the whole point of any kind of broadcasting, of any kind of communication. We depend upon the trust between us. We depend that we tell each other the truth. For the most part, we don't. And I'm not preaching to a society which has found that very difficult to come by in recent years. I mean, the society in Ukraine, because I mean, I know Ukraine a little bit. I know Hungary very well. I know the Czech Republic very well. I know what used to be Eastern Germany very well. I know Poland very well. I think it's a terrible, terrible condemnation of the system, for example, in Hungary, that has allowed within the European Union the crazed president of Hungary or prime minister of Hungary to erect a fence around his country to stop immigrants. I go back to these poor Turkish people. They wouldn't have got to Germany because they couldn't have got through the iron barbed wire of Hungary. So our civilization would not have been saved, as it looks as if it's going to be, by 2 immigrants. Right, I've whittled on for about 15 minutes, so now it's your turn.
Thank you, Tony. I think that we all need a little bit time to swallow what you have just said, because sometimes we don't have enough strength, enough courage to express, to put it this way. And thank you for uttering all these ideas. Thank you for sharing your point of view with us. What is important now, I believe, is the understanding that the world is changing. And all of us have our own individual way, our own individual experience of dealing with these changes. And obviously, there are changes in our consciousness. There have been changes in our lifestyle. And there are a lot of changes in our system of values. We've got absolutely new ideas to deal with, new concepts. And that's why I would really appreciate if our students and our other highly respected participants would take part in the discussion and exchange your point of view about the mess that we've been in and possible ways of dealing with it. So any ideas? Any questions?
The cat, Vika's cat has gone mad. It's trying to get out through the window. Trying to escape. So it's a bit like you, dear. You're trying to get out through the window.
Yeah, and its name is Messi, so sounds like just similar to our topic.
Very good. I like that.
Mess, yeah. Okay, so questions, please. Now I'm addressing our first year students. You've got a unique chance to talk directly to the world's outstanding documentary film director. So please.
No, I want to correct that. You've got the chance, if that's the right thing, to talk to a friend, regardless of what I might or might.
This sounds even better. I agree.
In my lurid past.
So?
Yeah, I have just a sort of remark plus a small question to you, because, well, when I'm looking at the contemporary world, I'm a bit scared, or at least I'm not that optimistic, because it's been like 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall now, and now we are experiencing in some parts of the world, Europe, but also America, but also Asia, probably Africa, we are experiencing a sort of building of walls, but also a sort of iron curtain on a smaller scale, not iron curtain, but divided Europe into our world into 2 halves, but smaller, like you said, Hungary, for instance, many other places. Well, I'm not very optimistic, because even though we are just right after the US elections, which Trump is ousted, but, well, it's not just Trump, it's just a broader process, I would say. So I'm not that optimistic, because what always drives people somehow forward, but also backwards, would be like a mixture of greed and the pursuit of happiness, in my opinion. So would you just simply think or try to make a sort of, from your own experience, which is much broader than mine?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really important question. Yes. I mean, the world has always been full of demagogues, has always been full of dictators, has always been full of people who think they know best. I mean, next to you is Belarus. I don't need to tell you about Belarus, and I'm not here to preach about our freedoms as opposed to any freedoms in Belarus. But I mean, Belarus, to me, all the demonstrations that take place every weekend, and the people who have bravely spoken against Lukashenko, I mean, are to be applauded. The bigger problem is further up the road in Russia, what are we going to do about Mr. Putin? I don't know. It's not my problem. But if you just looked at Putin and if you just looked at Lukashenko, yes, you would think, you would be pessimistic. I mean, I think Hungary is small fry, if you see what I mean. I think Hungary is irrelevant. But the bigger problems are up the road. I am optimistic in that I don't believe that all empires throughout history have fallen. Why have they fallen? Because because in that well-known phrase, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that will happen to all of them. And I'm sure that will happen in Russia eventually. And I'm sure that will, I mean, Russian people are wonderful. Every time I go to Moscow, I have a wonderful time. And I think, why are they being oppressed by this madman? And I'm glad this is being recorded, and I know I won't ever be allowed into Russia again, but he's a lunatic. I mean, he's an oligarch, he's a desperado. And simply going back to my illustration about what John Reith said about the BBC, I mean, we know for a fact that Putin suppresses pretty well all criticism. Now, anybody who's crazy enough to think that if you suppress all criticism, in time, that will come back to haunt you. And in time, that will, I mean, I don't know how many of you know, I don't know if it's part of your curriculum, but one of Shakespeare's most interesting plays is called Richard III. And Richard III, on the night before the Battle of Bosworth, where he was killed and order restored by the Tudors, I'm not sure that was necessarily the fact, but he was haunted by all the people he'd killed. Julius Caesar, Brutus was haunted by the fact that he'd killed Julius Caesar. Now, Shakespeare, being Shakespeare, doesn't take sides, but that's a well-known fact that you do become haunted by all of your bad deeds. I mean, we will never, ever get the truth of Stalin's last days. But even if in Khrushchev's 1956 speech and later Gorbachev's attempts to understand what happened to Stalin in the last year or so of his life, it would appear that Stalin was the same. He was haunted by all the people he killed. I mean, 30 million people is a lot of people to be haunted by. But it didn't end well for Stalin. That's all I can tell you. And I don't think it'll end well for Putin. So I'm optimistic. And I'm optimistic of the fact that Biden, and particular Kamala Harris, who I think is an amazing woman, who's the vice president-elect, as you know, I'm very optimistic there. I mean, Vice President Biden has said on day one, which unfortunately is not going to be until January the 20th, but on day one, he's going to join the Paris Climate Accord. He's going to join the World Health Organization. He's going to turn back a lot of Trump's idiotic, despotic, dictatorial, monstrous, I was going to say regulations, but they're not even regulations, tweets. So I'm a bit more optimistic than you, but it's an important question to worry about, I think.
Okay, well, by the way, you quoted Shakespeare, Richard III, and was it but Richard in Shakespearean play that says, even a beast so fierce has some degree of pity, and I have none, thou am no beast. Can we just apply this to some of the politicians here? Because like Trump, for instance.
Well, we shouldn't keep this simply about Trump, but
Putin,
I mean,
Stalin.
Your question was a very, very important question. My simple answer is the American people have voted against Trump, not against the Republican Party, but against Trump. That should make us optimistic. Mm-hmm. Somebody else. You're all very quiet. There's all these glamorous ladies.
There are the questions on the chat box. Do you see them, Tony? Shall I read them out for you?
The questions are on the what?
On the chat box, in the chat box.
No, you're confusing me now. Oh, in the chat box?
Yeah.
Ah, right. No, this is more technology.
Yeah, so the first question
How
from,
can I type my question? Good
can you
question.
see
Yeah.
them? The first question from Lisa sounds like this. Do
Yes,
films
I can see it. I can see it. Okay,
during the
Lisa,
pandemic?
Lisa, and
The question is, do
yes,
films
yes. Got it.
be
Right.
made during the
Lisa,
pandemic?
which is Lisa? Show me Lisa. Where is Lisa? Oh, hello. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Lisa. No, they're not, and it's virtually stopped, which is a disaster. I mean, it's not just films are not being made, but I mean, there's virtually no theatre, there are no concerts, there are some concerts, but very few. The arts have suffered more catastrophically than any other organization. It's a pity that that people have, an enormous number of people have died. I'm not in any way unsympathetic to that, obviously. I mean, I think I'm in one of the high risk areas, you'll be glad to know, Irina, because I'm a geriatric, so I'm definitely high risk. And although I wear a face mask, not this morning, but I mean, I do tend to wear the face mask and I wash my hands with great frequency. But nonetheless, no, films are not being made, unfortunately. There are some attempts now being made to start it up again. And I think if we believe the vaccine invented by these two Turkish immigrants, I'll keep saying that because it's important, then come next spring, away we'll go again. People don't want to make films in the wintertime anyway, it's too cold. We want to have a nice, easy life. And Stanislav has asked me, yes, is the answer. Where's Stanislav?
Thank you for your answer.
Oh, there. Yeah, hi. It's a pleasure, Lisa. I can see Stanislav, but no picture. He's got no picture. He's a blank.
I'm here. Can you hear me and see me?
Good. Yes.
So.
Yes,
Okay.
we should be afraid. Hi, Stanislav. I can see you now.
Hi.
Yes, we should be afraid. Not afraid, we should be wary. And I think what we should be wary of, I mean, again, one of the things, sorry to keep going back to Biden and Trump, but one of the things that Biden has said he will, one of the things that Trump did was to stop any Muslim coming to the United States. Mad. I mean, completely mad. He would have stopped those two Turkish immigrants. I keep referring to them. But so Biden has said he will reverse that. I mean, the only way we will ever get to understanding other people is to have contact with them. Now, famously, which is why, again, going back to the previous question about optimistic or not optimistic, that famously, when before the Second World War, Chamberlain, our prime minister, tried to do a deal with Hitler and failed. Chamberlain said, well, we shouldn't really worry. It's a far off country, it's Czechoslovakia. It's a far off country of which we know very little. I mean, that is a brainless remark on any level. But the fact is that had we bothered to understand them and understand what their problems were, then that particular crisis might not have happened. And one of the moments of complete joy for me, I mean, I wasn't at the BBC then, I was still at university, but I remember watching on television the Russian tanks rolling into Hungary in 1956 and thinking, this can't happen. And then when it happened again in 1968, this can't happen. Because once you can see what is happening, then you have beginnings of an understanding between the beginnings of understanding the problem and also between two peoples. And there's no question whatsoever that television, particularly television and film and news reporting, helped to stop the Vietnam War, because we could see that what was being done in our names, especially if you were American, was completely idiotic and had no sense, no logic, no anything. And I think to have awarded Kissinger the Nobel Peace Prize as a result of, quotes, stopping the Vietnam War, I thought that was the most grotesque illustration of the misuse by one society of making a prize that was meant to be peace prize into something political. Same of Aung San Suu Kyi. I mean, to have given her the Nobel Peace Prize, admirable in itself, but then to have sat back as a society and watched while the entire Rohingya population was decimated as an act of public genocide, really, by the Burmese government. I think that was monstrous.